nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, November 15th, 2024, and today we are going to do the Feedback Friday thing. We will get a question about roots in different scenarios, talk about if it's necessary to mulch garlic, and finally send you into your weekend with a Friday field note. So let's do it. All right, I hope everyone is having a lovely Friday so far. I know a lot of you are still in full-blown Friday harvest mode, so hopefully this show can provide you something to listen to in the wash pack or the field. Also, being Friday, that means it is Feedback Friday, where we look back at some of the discussions from the week. To recap, we covered potatoes on Monday, farm books on Tuesday, starting a composting operation with Jane Murner on Wednesday, and then static aerated compost yesterday. In the potato episode from Monday, I discussed using the potato slips instead of the potato cuttings, and several of you chimed in who had tried it and found much the same thing I did. Smaller but nice potatoes. In fact, here's a helpful comment on this subject from @WilliamBailing7816, who writes, quote, "I did my PhD in a potato breeding lab. I think your idea is interesting, but probably only successful in certain circumstances. Seed producers in Africa use cuttings to produce certified potato seed, so people are doing it, but not for food production. In North America and Europe, you may be able to use that method to grow seed potatoes cheaply if you have them covered year-round to keep out insects. Growing from sprouts may help you avoid some bacterial and fungal diseases, but it will never protect you from viral diseases that are spread by aphids like potato virus Y, potato virus X, or potato leaf roll virus. Optimal yields are usually obtained from seed pieces that are 2 to 3 ounces, so 55 to 85 grams. You can dip your cutting knife in a thin slurry of horticultural lime and water between cuts to prevent the spread of virus between tubers as well." End quote. Thanks, William, and good to know about the lime water dip. That's cool. Like I've said many times, we got a brilliant comment section, one with potato doctors. Who knew? And to William's point, maybe there will only be select varieties for which this produces large enough numbers of potatoes to make sense, or maybe not at all. But also, perhaps using the slips would be a way to grow out seed potatoes, like William mentioned there, for more expensive varieties. I can see some of the rare organic sort of potato, often those like purple flesh potatoes, and definitely like a lot of the fingerlings are going for like $20 or $30 a pound. Potentially you can grow them out this way for a late season planting or the next year's planting and turn 1 pound into mini pounds. Anyway, I will continue to tinker in the spring and get back to you when I've learned whatever it is that I'm going to learn. For emphasis, like I said in that episode, if you're going to trial this as well, just do it small. Small is fun, small is safe. Let's do small. On Tuesday, we talked about books, and there are several good ones mentioned in the comments section there on YouTube if you're looking for any additional farm book ideas. Someone also mentioned not having enough female farmer authors on my list, which I think is fair. In fact, another good nerdy one I regretted not mentioning immediately after was Nicole Masters' For the Love of Soil. Great book, which I read a digital copy of several years ago. And then also, I forgot to mention Rhonda Sherman's wonderful book, The Worm Farmer's Handbook. These are 2 masterpieces. I love both of those. That interview I did with Rhonda back in the day for the No-Till Market Garden podcast in season 1 is still one of my faves. I loved that interview. I also did not spend enough time on either The Ecological Farmer or Sustainable Market Farming. Those are truly exceptional books. I mean, what Pam Dalling has done for the farming world is just, it's unbelievable. She's done a lot of writing for Growing for Market magazine, and her website is wonderful. And she's also been on the podcast, where I mostly pestered her about her egalitarian community that she lives in, because it's fascinating. Anyway, shout out to our many awesome female farmers out there changing the game. Another person mentioned Sayre's free publication called Growing Cover Crops Profitably, I think, which again is free. It's wonderful and it's free. It's one of the best free resources I've ever come across. Folks also mentioned there were some older books, which I agree with some of that. Some of the commenters that there are a lot of great older ag books as well that I did not mention with lots of great insight. So go exploring those comments if you're interested in more books. In the episode with Jane on composting, we discussed compost pest management, and I liked this comment from, I think it's @MK Ty 200, who wrote, quote, "Not a commercial compost operation here, but I am a small-scale farmer on 50 acres in the Sierra Nevada. Much of the property is forested/wild, so I have a pretty large compost operation on site just for our own use and family/friends. We have heavy bear pressure, and we use the same principle. Food waste is never left exposed. Bury it with plenty of carbon, and I've never had a bear dig into our thermophilic pile. No fencing around it or anything. A cold pile may be a different story, but I keep my piles hot, and it's never been an issue for me." End quote. Love that. The power of keeping the compost pile adequately covered is huge. Then, yesterday, about the living pathways, I discussed some of the difficulties of our property being on a slope and how living pathways are the logical choice for us because of that slope. And at Argon Xavius asked, quote, "Why not lay down logs or bricks horizontally and terrace the land if it's so sloped? Would the terraforming not improve retention and thus pay for itself over time?" End quote. So the slope is nothing crazy. It's not like a hillside. If I put a ball on the top and pushed it, it would slowly make its way down, but it wouldn't like tumble down the hill. So that's part of the reason I didn't do any sort of terracing to start this garden. Also, I've actually never farmed flat land here and have only ever farmed slopes, but this is the first slope I've ever farmed that had drainage issues, which they did not come up in my initial evaluation either. If the drainage was better, I think I would have more pathway choices. My last farm, I was able to keep them bare for the most part and just cultivate them. And then the compost slowly mulched those pathways over time. Here, though, they just wash out. Everything just washes out because the water pools so quickly. Being in the made-up semi-subtropical region that I am, I also liked the idea of using the slope and pathways to shed water in times of heavy rain, because there are times, even on good drainage soils, when we just get so much rain, it's overwhelming. That has worked to some extent, but the beds more or less stay low to the ground, while the paths are slowly mounding up as the soil and mulch build, which has created new problems where the beds become the low spots unless I mulch them. Because with the living pathways, I'm also not raising them up. So they're not as mounded as they were to start. And water always is going to find the low spots. Lastly, terracing on a small scale can be done by hand, but the area I would have to terrace is close to an acre, and that would be wildly expensive. Maybe it would pay for itself over time, but that is a lot of upfront cash, especially when you're already trying to start a farm, which is itself very expensive. It does have me rethinking how one approaches even a small amount of slope, though, in a wet climate. I think if you can afford terracing/terraforming, then sure, go for it. If you can't, you will have to get creative. Or maybe you'll be like me and you'll find out that one day you're kind of limited. Anyway, thanks as always for all the insight you all leave in the comments section. Again, I can't always respond, but I do always read as many as I can. I appreciate you all a ton. So much great insight there. All right, up next, we will get a question from our Patreon community, BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seeding to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. Their same-day shipping can help keep your planting schedules on track when the unexpected happens. They're here to help you grow good food. Turning to Johnny's means you can plant high-quality, trial-proven varieties with confidence and know that their expert staff is ready to help with first-hand knowledge, because they've grown them themselves. Learn more at johnnyseeds.com. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast and want to support it, you can at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come from, but I will always get to those Patreon questions. Today's question comes from Patreon member Alberto Suarez Esteban, who writes, quote, "Loving the Daily Show, Jesse." Thanks, Alberto. It would be nice if you could talk about how to interpret soil tests. I feel like I have much to learn there. Also, do you know what triggers the growth of sweet potato roots? I grew them in 3 different ways this year. In soil, both vines and roots grew well. In straw bales, vines were small, but roots were pretty sizable. And grow bags, vines were very vigorous, but the roots didn't grow at all. All were fed the same compost. Thank you so much, Alberto. End quote. Thanks, Alberto. So to the first part of your question about the soil test, my plan is to go through each of the most popular soil tests and maybe some of the less popular ones individually, because each test is a little different and has to be interpreted a little bit differently. As we head into the spring, we will dedicate no small amount of time to talking about soil tests, preferably with experts on the show and trying to understand how to best utilize each soil test. But for now, for today, for the second part of your question, this is actually kind of an interesting finding. Now, I'm assuming by roots you were talking about the sweet potatoes themselves, which listeners may not realize are considered roots and not tubers. The interesting thing about that is that tubers often have a stopping point in their growth. Roots will pretty much grow indefinitely until the plant dies. In warmer, more tropical regions, I've read that families can grow sweet potatoes and just harvest what they need, like a fun little dirt perennial. Anyway, I'll assume that the sweet potatoes themselves are what you are referring to by roots and not the roots that grow off of the vines. The first finding that the sweet potatoes in the soil had both vines and sweet potatoes grow well makes sense. No surprise there. Sweet potatoes are a very easygoing crop. Much like okra, they are not particularly picky when it comes to soil fertility, and a little compost and some decent well-draining soil is generally more than enough for them. The second finding in the straw bales, that the vines were small but roots were pretty sizable, is definitely interesting. I looked at a couple studies on root yield and vine length, and each variety is a little bit different and will likely be different depending on the conditions. In other words, longer vines do not always equate to higher yield, and in some cases it was directly the opposite. In the straw bale situation, my assumption here is that the sweet potatoes recognized a lack of long-term fertility somehow and put its energy into creating the sweet potatoes rather than vines. But that's a complete guess, and maybe one of our many scientists who seem to watch this show can give a better explanation in the comments. However, this may, in fact, affect their storageability, and I'd be curious if one of those treatments stores better than another. And the last one, the grow bags, could be potentially maybe an overabundance of fertility or a lack of room for roots. I know you said you used the same compost, but perhaps there was something else in there, maybe like the soil mix or something, that gave the sweet potatoes more than what they needed to grow and kept them content to put their energy into the plant instead of the roots. It could also be the warmth as well. Grow bags tend to have warmer soil. So perhaps that combo of fertility and warmth with potentially moisture retention provided them with more than ideal conditions and gave them less of a reason to store their energy, i.e. make roots. These are all assumptions, but I suppose your next step, if you are trying to determine which one to use, would be to simply see which stores better and which tastes better. My assumption is that the soil-grown sweet potatoes will both store and taste the best after curing, of course, but you never know. It's a cool little experiment, though. I've never grown sweet potatoes in 3 different conditions like that. Very interesting stuff, and thanks for sharing. And thanks for the support, Alberto. On the soil test part, we will get to that before too long as well. There are tests that monitor for biology and soil health, tests that monitor for available nutrients and all sorts of stuff. So over time, we will go through all of it. All right, up next, let's talk about mulching garlic. Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to be in the field growing food for my community, not creating elaborate pack lists, not writing newsletters or responding to emails, not designing and maintaining web stores, and etc. And I especially don't enjoy doing those things after an already full and fulfilling day of growing food. Actually, if I spent less time on my phone and behind the computer, that would be great. If only there were a solution for that. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for farmers. With one single platform, Farmhand enables you to offload your administrative tasks, send and manage communications, and sell more to your customers. Farmhand saves growers an average of 6 hours of administrative load each week. That's 6 hours so you can get back into the field, spend more time with friends or family, or have a life outside of the farm, which is actually a thing. Think about it. What would you do with an extra 6 hours a week? Sign up for a free trial with the link in the show notes, because now is the best time to dial in those systems for the next growing season. Follow the Farmhand link in the show notes to learn more. All right, back to the show. All right, so do you need to mulch garlic? In short, according to studies, if you have a way to mulch your garlic, yes, you probably should. This is for obvious reasons like weed suppression and soil health, both of which many mulches can be spectacular at contributing. Obviously, as a no-till guy, I love me some mulch, but I found myself reading a review on mulched garlic this week and was absolutely floored by all the benefits that have been found in the research to mulching your garlic. Let me just run through a few real quick. Mulched garlic showed increases in leaves per plant, length of the leaf, number of roots per plant, clove number per bulb and neck diameter. Yields were increased both in bulb size and number of cloves from various mulches. There were also some demonstrations in this review of improvements in things like vitamin C content in the cloves in the mulched garlics. Then, of course, there are all the general benefits of mulches, from keeping the soil in place to feeding the soil, improving soil biology, and retaining moisture, which is important for garlic, which can easily become water stressed. There's also the temperature factor, which mulch helps insulate the soil and protect it from heaving, meaning when the soil freezes, it can literally lift the cloves out of it. Also, larger bulb losses can occur with no mulch, like they just freeze and die. However, if you don't have a mulch, should you be concerned? Well, maybe not. Some years, especially in cold climates where snow is common, you may get away without a mulch just fine. Dan Brisebois, host of the Seed Farmer podcast, did a nice little experiment where he found positive results in Quebec not using a mulch, but ultimately he told me they did that experiment for a couple of years, but what they found was that mulched garlic still caught up with the unmulched garlic. Probably, says Dan, because at the time they didn't irrigate their garlic and the mulched garlic retained moisture better. He also mentioned the weed control in the unmulched garlic was difficult for them and said that these days they only mulch their garlic. So if you didn't mulch your garlic, obviously you would have to manage the weeds. You may also lose some percentage of the crop. In a rough winter, it may be a lot, but you may also get your garlic slightly earlier due to soil warmth. Because remember, many mulches keep the soil cooler for longer. Now, there is not a lot of research on compost mulch. My experience in using compost mulch in the past is that compost mulch can work fine as a garlic mulch, but I honestly don't have a side-by-side data to know what is better and to what degree. Is compost mulch better than no mulch at all? Worse? I'm honestly not sure. It may differ based on variety. We grow almost exclusively music is the variety with some elephant garlic. Other varieties may react differently to different mulches, and I can't really find any substantial research on deep compost mulch for garlic. Most research is, of course, on straw and hay and plastic mulches. So in short, you should probably mulch your garlic if you can. If you can't, you may be leaving its survival up to chance. And one bad winter could wipe out a huge chunk of your garlic crop. Also, not mulching, you may be missing out on some of other benefits this season. And the reason I have been thinking about this is that I don't have a mulch for my garlic this year, but it was planted into beds that had been refreshed with compost mulch this summer. So that mulch is still mostly intact, and I will see if it's adequate enough to protect the garlic, block the weeds, feed the soil, and to produce some bulbs next year. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No Till Growers for their support. I will send you with a Friday field note, as always, for the road. But please always remember to share the shows you like with your friends. That's an awesome way to help support it. Another awesome way to support our work is to become a Patreon member at patreon.com/no-till-growers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or if you sign up in the month of November, you get a shout out in the show. So big shout outs today to Jeffrey Padberg, Justin Van Dyke, Jacob Genko, and Soup Snake. This sounds like the story of a startup company called Soup Snake, clearly, with three brothers. Or maybe they're cousins because they don't have the same last name. So Jacob, Justin, and Jeffrey, they're cousins. And they decide to start Soup Snake. And they are all, it's going well. It's got some good business, and their people are really loving their soup snakes, which are not snake soup, but soup snake. So soup served in a snake. And it's going really well. And then all of a sudden, a giant metal arm grabs their entire planet and pulls it into a space station as it orbits the Earth, and it hurts business for a little while, if I'm being honest. But and the giant new aliens who pulled them into the space station are very nice, very kind, and understanding, and they decide to put them back in orbit, which was the right thing to do. Anyway, hope you all have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday. Bye. Okay, so it's like raining. I don't know how well you're going to be able to hear this. It's raining. I'm in my tunnel, And one of the allures of having a tunnel space, like a covered space, is that you can work in these spaces when it's rainy or stormy. But the funny thing is, it's so incredibly loud inside of a tunnel when it's raining, or like kind of scary when it's super windy or lightning outside, that it becomes an almost a non-existent place to be. It's like the last place I really want to be on a rainy day. So anyway, glad we're getting all the rain we needed this summer in November. That's super fun. You all have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday. Bye.